Rob, part of the idea of this series is to talk about the arc of sabermetrics, the arc of analytics. And you were there from the beginning working with Bill James. So can you talk about some of the key inflection points, the key moments that were mini revolutions in baseball analytics through the years up to this point?
Well, I didn't become aware of any of these things until probably 1984, when I happened across my first Bill James baseball abstract. And this is true for a lot of people who do what I do. That was like the eureka moment. Everything changed for me within 10 minutes of finding this book and reading the first page. I was in a bookstore, I can remember like it was yesterday, exactly where I was standing, what the book looked like. I probably looked at this for maybe just the back cover, maybe the first couple of pages, and realized I had to own this book. Bought it immediately, took it home. This is probably on a Friday, devoured it over the weekend, and my life has never been the same. That, for me, that was the inflection point, was Bill James, and that was true for many, many other people. Most of whom, of course, didn't wind up doing what I do or anything like what I do, lawyers, doctors, whomever, but it changed the way they thought. It's not about the world, as it did in my case, but at least about baseball. And you know, Bill obviously wasn't the only sabermetrician who ever lived. Later I became familiar with the work of Dick Kramer, Earnshaw Cook before him, all the way back to Hugh Fullerton, who engaged in his own sabermetrics back in the dead ball era. And then I later found that, I'm blanking on the name of the editor of Baseball Magazine in the teens and 20s, but he did some groundbreaking work.
F.C. Lane.
F.C. Lane, exactly. You know, he was writing articles about the inadequacies of batting average in 1919. Nobody paid attention, even though Baseball Magazine had a wide readership. It was a very mainstream publication. But Lane was, at the same time he was traveling all over the country to interview ball players about their careers and their lives, he was also writing these amazingly revolutionary articles that nobody really paid attention to, at least as far as I've been able to tell. For whatever reason, those didn't stick. And it really wasn't, even though Lane was a good writer and made a compelling case, that's an interesting, I think, story that hasn't been written, is why didn't anybody care about what F.C. Lane was writing about statistics? You can imagine the sabermetric revolution having happened 60 or 70 years before it did. But it didn't happen, and I don't really understand why. After Lane, the field essentially lay fallow for, you know, Lane stopped writing those sorts of articles in, I think, the 1920s or early 30s. The field was basically fallow for a good 30 or 40 years. Until Earnshaw Cook and a few other people came along and wrote some marginally successful or popular books. And then in the 70s, of course, that's when Dick Kramer came along. But it really took Bill James, who was both a fascinating analyst and a brilliantly entertaining writer. It took that combination to make it all come together and popularize it. And you know, without Bill, I would be doing I don't know what, and I would still, I'd be a crazy, rabid baseball fan, but I wouldn't be the baseball fan that I am.
A couple other names in that arc. You're absolutely right about F.C. Lane. By the way, graduate of Boston University.
That's right, I wrote his bio, and I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, he went to BU. So
right.
I think Henry Chadwick's crucial, because just the same way we enjoy game day today, we enjoyed the game on TV and radio, people enjoyed the box scores, those ugly early box scores he created about the game. I think that was crucial to making it the national pastime. I think people just really started following it more closely and became a conversation point among other fans of the game, and that's a thesis I have anyway about Henry Chadwick.
I would agree with that. I think that whenever you can create a fundamental way of engaging with the game, you're going to add more people who want to engage with it. And that happened with box scores and then, you know, game stories in the newspapers and and people thought that putting games on the radio was going to decrease interest, or at least attendance. And of course, all it did was increase attendance and interest. And then television, the same thing. And now with, I remember when MLBAM was saying, we're going to put games on the internet, people said, nobody's going to want to watch games on their computers. And even if they do, it's going to hurt attendance. None of these things happen. The more ways you can engage people, the more they're going to want to engage and do all the things that they did before and the new things. And certainly the box score. And of course, Chadwick is, I will argue that he is one of only 2 people in the Hall of Fame as pioneers. There's this class, pioneer executive, but the great majority of people who are in under that rubric are in as executives. Chadwick is in as a pioneer, and Candy Cummings, sort of oddly, is in as a pioneer of the curveball. But and I've argued that the Hall of Fame should revisit that category, and all of a sudden, if you do that, then you've got room for Bill James without having to go through any hoops, and you've got room. This is another subject. Then you've got room for Frank Jobe. You know, let's bring the pioneers back because they've played a real role in this game, and certainly sabermetricians are part of that.
Would you? I know Brent Tricky's already in, but would you call his work part of that pioneering?
Oh,
sure.
He
had a lot of influence.
But, I mean, he would have. He obviously qualifies as an executive. If somehow he didn't, if maybe his teams hadn't been as successful as they were, sure. Let's say his teams had won 0 World Series, but he was around for 20 or 30 years and invented the modern farm system and brought Jackie Robinson. Sure, he would fit into that category too.
Exactly. So going from Chadwick and FC Lane, one guy we didn't mention with a very important guy in analytics is Alan Roth with Brent Tricky.
Right, and I would have mentioned him earlier, but I couldn't remember his name. But yes, and you know, Roth. I'd love to see a full-length book or a long article written about him because I don't have a great handle on what exactly he did. I know he certainly was a statistician in the sense that he was tracking things that nobody else was. Pitch counts, for example. I've got a book about Sandy Koufax, and there's a log in the back of the book of every one of Koufax's starts in one of his seasons. Maybe it's every season. And that's because Roth was actually tracking these things. And of course, Ricky had hired him back in the 1930s or 40s. Somewhere, I'm guessing, there's a massive trove of Roth material, which gives us, one of the things that it gives us is, it gives us a way to find out if our pitch count estimators are accurate. Because we actually have the pitch counts for all those games that Roth was tracking. We don't really have that for any other portions of baseball history before the 80s, I believe.
Someone of your stature in the writing of all this in the game would be really the guy to press that issue. Where are the records the Dodgers might have kept of Alan Roth's work? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I think there is an Alan Roth collection. It might be in the Hall of Fame. It might be in another library someplace. I've seen references to it. It's out there. It's waiting for someone to come in and really do some neat things with.
Well, the fact that we mentioned it in this course, which has thousands of students, maybe someone will take that idea and run with it. But if you want to own it, Rob, you better get on it because it's going to be out there soon. So another name that's important is George Lindsay. In the 60s, right. He does a lot of work really looking at the game, getting sort of at this sense of linear weights and run expectancies. And you know, he was pretty crucial to the arc of these things. But would you talk about, you know, clearly Bill James deserves to be in this wing of baseball innovators in the Hall of Fame. What are some modern day work that you've been impressed with that you think, not necessarily a one-off bit of research, but the arc of some careers recently that might be qualified as being very important? It's a strange time because so much work is behind closed doors, right, in the team offices. But you know, what are some important works lately? Big ideas, big revolutions in sabermetric thought recently?
Well, I mean, and I'm going to miss a few things. Certainly, I'm going to miss some names. It's in the last 10 years, I started doing what I do now, writing for the internet, basically, in 1996. And there wasn't a whole lot going on, at least publicly. Baseball Prospectus began right around the same time I started. But obviously since then we've had an explosion of not only data, but also websites and different writers. And I don't keep up as well with them as I should. I feel like I've always been sort of a late adapter of technology. It took me forever to get a cell phone. It took me probably at least a year, maybe 2 years longer than it should have to switch from, and this is literally true, looking up players by grabbing a baseball encyclopedia, the baseball encyclopedia, or Total Baseball, which for those who don't know, and many people watching this won't know what I'm talking about, but these books weigh about 8 pounds. And well after baseballreference.com was available, I was still grabbing the 8-pound book and setting it on my lap, just out of a habit. And then of course, once I made the switch, I haven't picked up one of those encyclopedias since. I mean, it was crazy, but it took me forever. Everything does sift down to me eventually, all the important stuff. The one thing that I did latch onto pretty quickly, because at that point, there wasn't the explosion yet, was Boris McCracken's work, which I found utterly fascinating. I think that, not to sound immodest, but I was probably the first person with a national audience, with a national stage. I was at ESPN.com at the time, to write about Voros's work. And I talked to, in the course of doing that, I talked to Craig Wright about it, and he spoke about it, and I talked to Bill James, and his mind was blown. And to some small degree, I helped popularize Voros's work, which doesn't really mean anything. It would have become what it became one way or the other without me, or with or without me. But that was exciting, very exciting. It was a new way to look at the game. And that still comes up every day. Voros's work has been, it's been modified. It's been, it's not as simplistic as a lot of us thought that it was, as much as I thought it was at the time. But it's still basically, you can't look at pitchers without looking at batted ball data. And the year-to-year batted ball data for them. So that's number one, if only because it's been around for so long. And we're still looking at it. I just saw a study a few weeks ago that by Dan Rosenheck that sort of refined it, and it was fascinating. So this is that was, I believe, the winter of 2001. So it's 13 years later, and it's still seminal work that we have to grapple with. So that's the big one. I think the pitch framing information, that's been around for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and again, people are still doing new things with it all the time. I just had a great discussion yesterday with Dave Cameron from Fangraphs. I hope I'm not, this is probably not a revelation. Dave and some other people are skeptical about the impact of pitch framing. That maybe some of the numbers have been a little bit overstated. Not that the methodology is wrong, but that the methodology doesn't consider everything that goes into why the pitcher throws the pitch where he threw it, and many other things. So that's going to be a discussion that we're having for quite a while yet. And of course, that's all due to the PitchFX data that was released thanks to MLBAM. They could have kept all that stuff under lock and key, and they didn't, to their credit. So I think Voros's work 13, 14, 15 years ago was amazing, and the PitchFX data has been revolutionary. The base running, that's a relatively new addition to the field. We're able now to look at a player at his fielding and his base running, and these are things that 15 years ago we simply didn't have. We could make estimates and say, let's bump this guy up a notch in our mind because he's a really good base runner. Now we actually have numbers, and we're going to have more numbers with the new data that we're going to see in the next couple of years, and that's going to create a whole new cottage industry, and many more job opportunities for people who can analyze the data, and it's going to take years to sort all that stuff out. So we're not anywhere near the end of this process. We'll never get to the end, but there were, I would say 5, 10 years ago, I thought, I wonder if we're getting close to the point where there's not a lot of interesting work to be done yet. I didn't believe that we were close to that end, but I just wondered about it. And now I'm sure that we're not close to it. That as long as I'm interested in the subject, and, there will be wonderful things to read about and to analyze.
Yeah, I think the next thing, clearly you identified work that BIS might be doing with base running and that we're hearing about at this conference. But MLBAM just announced at the MIT conference this new technology that they're trying to get right this year and maybe unveil everywhere for the 2015 season. Have you had a chance to think about that data, look at those data that might be coming out?
Well, sure. I mean, I was at the presentation when they rolled it out in Boston, and I wrote notes in my notebook. This changes everything, and I was blown away. It's so big, it's hard to get your brain around. And until we see the data, this is not something that one person can sit there and write an essay about. This is what it's going to mean. There are going to be dozens of really smart people trying to figure out what it means. And they'll come up with questions that I couldn't come up with, and vice versa. It's going to change, especially when it comes to defense. It's going to change everything. Assuming that the data is released publicly, all of the defensive metrics, all of them that exist now, will immediately be obsolete. And all the people at those websites and companies who supply data will have to scurry around completely changing whatever they do. We don't know yet how public it's going to be. It will absolutely, we know it will change everything defensively internally with the clubs. And you will see moves made. I think we've already seen this to some degree, but you'll see more moves made where if you didn't know that defense was a part of the equation, you would sort of scratch your head and say, why is this guy getting this sort of offer? Well, it's because now teams and agents can quantify with some great precision how many runs he saved with his defense, and the agents are going to say, hey, no more just guessing. We know he saved 23 runs last year and is going to save 18 this year based on our model. You need to pay us for those 18 runs. And that's never really happened before. It's never been a part of the arbitration process. It's never been a big part of, I mean, sure, great defensive players have been paid. Ozzie Smith, for at least a few moments, was the highest paid player in baseball. There are some defensive players who just stand out physically that you can't deny their brilliance. But there are others who are brilliant. You can't see it with your eyes, at least not well. And now the eyes are going to be almost irrelevant when it comes to evaluating defense, at least in the major leagues.
Do you have any data on agents and their ability to really argue this thing about defense and runs? My thesis is that the clubs are years ahead of agents and discussion that goes on in arbitration. Do you have any comment on that, or do you think that's...
Well, I think that's, and I'm not an expert by any means, I think that's generally true. But first of all, there are very few arbitration cases anymore. It doesn't really happen much. It's just not, the dollars that are involved, they're not big enough, the differences to justify going into that room and telling a player he's not as good as he thinks he is. So teams shy away from it. If it did come to that, if you had as many arbitration cases today as you used to, the teams would win more than they lost. And that was true in the past. I think that was usually because the agents were overreaching a little bit. You wouldn't see hardcore sabermetrics in those cases. I worked on some of those cases when I worked for Bill James. I didn't go in the room. I just helped prepare the exhibits. Generally, wasn't considered good, smart practice to try to awe the arbitrator with sabermetrics. It was basically keep it simple. This guy last year got this much because he knocked in 84 runs. Our guy knocked in 82. He should get that much as well. generally speaking, I completely agree that the teams are way ahead of the agencies. I know Scott Boras has some statistical people who help him, and I'm sure he's not the only one. But I'm sure there are a lot of smaller agencies that just don't have the manpower to do the sorts of things that the Red Sox or the Rays are doing and figure out exactly what the value is on this guy. But, I mean, if the new data is publicly available, it's not going to be difficult for an agent to just go to Fangraphs or wherever and say, look, he saved this many runs, everybody knows it. There's not a lot of arguing here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So just talk about your time with Bill James. I mean, we all know Bill James is such an important figure in the history of sabermetrics. So what was it like to work for Bill?
I wish I'd kept a diary. People ask me that a lot, and I have some specific memories, but not as many as I should have for 4 full years. In all honesty, it's daunting to work every day with a genius, a towering intellect like Bill's. And he's very down to earth in many ways, but he's also, his mind is generally operating on a different level than most of ours are. I was not a particularly good worker. I cared a lot, but I've always been grateful to Bill for tolerating me for 4 years, putting up with my ridiculous questions and my poor writing and all that. So, I wouldn't have a career without Bill. I could tell lots of stories. One of my favorite stories is when I worked for Bill, I'd grown up a Royals fan, and Bill was a Royals fan as well. I'd been working for Bill for about 3 years when the Royals either traded for, I think they traded for, or signed Kevin McReynolds, who at that point was probably, he was certainly overweight, and he was probably 32 or 33. He'd been a good player for quite a while with the Mets and the Padres. And while I became a big fan of Bill's work in 1984, now we're in 1992, and I think that my passion for the Royals was still more influential than it outweighed the analytical part.
Trying to be objective about it.
Yes, I wasn't able yet to be objective. That came later. I wasn't yet objective about the Royals. So I was very excited about this Kevin McReynolds transaction. Bill just sort of I just sort of asked what he thought about it. He sort of looked at me, didn't really say much, walked into his office, closed the door, came out about 5 hours later with a stack of paper about this tall on the old dot matrix printer paper that's sort of all strung together like an accordion. And he'd put together a study of players like Kevin McReynolds, how well they aged, how well they did in their age 33 season or whatever this was going to be. And my balloon was completely popped. Kevin McReynolds was obviously, according to Bill's work, over the hill. And as it turned out, he did nothing for the Royals. It was an awful move. It was just another in a long series of moves the Royals made, acquiring veteran players, which consigned them to, non-contenderhood for, that was year 7 or 8 after they'd won the World Series. But they made a lot of moves like that. This was just another. That's not an example of Bill's intellect. It's a matter of his tenacity, or it's an example of his tenacity and his curiosity, and his willingness to explain to his young charge that no, Santa Claus doesn't really exist.
That's a great story. I love that story. That's terrific. So, last question. This is one thing I try to talk about is that sabermetrics now is moving into this. Now it's academic. It's it's going to be taught. It's in universities, and speak to that. Well, what does a course looking at sabermetrics sort of mean? And does it mean anything to you at all?
Well,
do you have any reaction?
Well, the first time I heard about you teaching the course years ago, it was thrilling because I'd never heard of anything like that before. And I don't remember if I had that reaction then. I certainly have it now. I'm thinking back to when I was in college. And the closest I could get, we had at the University of Kansas, I was very fortunate. We actually had a literature of baseball course, which was wonderful. That was just reading novels about baseball, and that was one of my favorite courses.
The Natural.
I think we read The Natural. We read all the big boys at that time that were out there. Coover. That's sort of, in a way, it's sort of a combination. You know, it's for sabermetricians too. For those who don't know, J. Henry Waugh, Universal Baseball Association, every baseball fan of literature or sabermetrics should read that novel. It's just wonderful. I come back to it in my mind all the time. But if there had been a sabermetrics course, I don't know how happy. You know, what's the maximum level of happiness possible? I'm not sure, but that's what I would have attained if that course had been available when I was in college. What it means today, I mean, I don't know if is it just a course that every single baseball fan should want to take because it's going to be so much fun, you can learn so much about the game? Is it one of the few obvious avenues to maybe someday getting a job in baseball? I think that's almost a prerequisite at this point. Like, if it's available, you have to take that course. And then, of course, many other courses, because there are going to be hundreds of people wanting jobs who took the sabermetrics course. Well, sure, so do these other 80 guys that I have applications from. But it seems like a prerequisite. There's not, the one thing that has never really existed is a single primer for sabermetrics. For, if you know, people ask, which book should I read if I want to learn? Well, there's this and this and this and this, and they're all like, each of them have components. And certainly, Alan Schwartz's book about the history of statistics in baseball touches on a lot of this, but Alan's book came out 10, 15 years ago now, and there have been a great number of books since then about sabermetrics. With all due respect to the people who wrote them, none of those books are as engaging as Bill James's abstracts were. And in the absence of something like that, I think a course is the best avenue toward learning all these things. Because obviously, you teach the course, you can draw from all these different sources and sort of put together the best combination. Because right now, there's not a book that has that. So, you know, it's funny, I feel like I miss so many things. I should probably take a course as a refresher.
You're welcome to. It's free, so you can sign up.
I absolutely should sign up. I mean, I would love to do that. And I know you've been kind enough to offer me a chance to speak at some point. I'd love to do that sometime too.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be online. Anyone can, all over the world can take it. But in my mind, what we're trying to do in this class is create sort of a modern textbook in it. We're going to teach sabermetrics through the video lectures that we're going to create. So that's our goal. So that primer on sabermetrics is essentially what's on my mind all the time.
Well, that's what books are coming to, is this sort of multimedia thing. So I think you're on the right track. I look forward to it.